Join Boise State Public Radio for a concert with blues guitarist and vocalist Coco Montoya at the Treefort Music Hall in Boise, February 13th. This concert is in honor of longtime KBSU DJ Arthur Ballinger, who is retiring after 47 years. Doors at 6, concert at 7 on the 13th of February for a night with Coco Montoya at the Treefort Music Hall. Details at boisestatepublicradio.org.
Well, from the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudet. You're listening to Idaho Matters. There's some concerning news about a new variant of avian influenza that recently infected dairy cattle in Nevada. The U.S. Department of Agriculture's Animal and Plant Inspection Service, in a technical brief, confirmed there is a genetic change that's happened, and scientists believe that this change may help the virus copy itself in mammals, including humans, and they may be able to copy this more easily. Now, the USDA report comes as a dairy farm worker in Nevada screened positive for H5N1. This is the first human infection identified in that state. So Dr. David Pate, former CEO of St. Luke's Health System and the co-author of the book, Preparing for the Next Global Outbreak, is joining us today to talk more in depth about this. Hi, Dr. Pate.
Hi, Gemma.
And folks, remember, if you have a public health question, send us an email, idahomatters@boisestate.edu. So, Dr. Pate, can we start with this report from the USDA? Can you tell us about what we know about this genetic change? And let's start with the cattle in Nevada, because scientists are calling this a spillover case because of the variant.
Yes, that's right. So to put this all in perspective, people that have been listening to your show now for a long period of time know my views on risks of novel organisms pretty well by now. And that is that the more that we let them, let that novel pathogen organism spread from person to person or animal to animal, the more we're giving it an opportunity to mutate or change in a way that it could change the properties of the virus. Well, avian influenzas, meaning influenzas that start with birds, they start with waterfowl, and avian influenzas have a hard time transmitting to humans because we're so different than birds. But if you look at pretty much all of our past influenza pandemics, it has started with an avian influenza virus. So it can adapt and change so that it can infect humans and spread from human to human, as evidenced by those past pandemics. So what you and I have been talking about for the last couple of years is that we are seeing progressive red flags that just because you have a new organism doesn't mean that it necessarily will become able to infect humans or will transmit from human to humans or even will become a pandemic. But every time we see a new red flag, we have to be increasing our concern and increasing our preparedness. And we're not really doing that. So what happened is that although we knew avian influenza virus had the capability in the laboratory to infect cows, we hadn't really seen that play out until the virus started spreading in cattle, and we've identified the first case last year in March in Texas. And so that's not good, but that doesn't necessarily mean it would start infecting humans. But then we started seeing human cases of infection. And the good news, though, is that we don't call them strains, we call them clades, but basically for your listeners, they can think of it as a strain of the avian influenza. The one in the cattle that has been spreading from cattle to cattle, and our government has not yet been able to stop that spread in now a year nearly, that is a strain B313. And so just remember B, and you can think of it as B for bovine, so cows. Now, that one has been infecting farm workers that work closely with cows, but they have typically gotten fairly mild illness, particularly conjunctivitis. And so we've been watching that. But then what happened is, and again, these avian viruses, they start in birds. What we saw is a similar but different clade or strain in birds. And whereas I said the one in the cattle is B, this one is D. And it appears that it is far more serious disease if it gets over to humans. Now we have a case of a 13-year-old girl in Canada who got the D infection from the birds, and they provided every life-saving capability we have, and that teenager barely survived. And then we had our first U.S. case, a man in Louisiana, and you and I talked about on the show, and he got it and he died. And so it is believed that this D form, or the one, and I'm saying D as in David, in case people can't understand, D as in David, that one is the one that spreads in the birds. So what happened? We, like I said, last year, we had the first spillover into cows. And we thought, well, maybe that was a fluke event. Well, just as you said, this one is another spillover with a different form of the virus. So now we know that this is potentially going to be an ongoing threat. And unfortunately, the more different viruses, avian viruses that can infect either humans or cattle or other animals, the more chance those influenza viruses, when they infect at the same time, can swap genetic material. Now we could drastically change the behavior of the virus. It could become a much greater threat, and particularly with this D strain that appears it would cause far more serious disease in humans. And as you mentioned in the lead up, one of the things is we look for certain mutations that we know when avian viruses acquire these mutations, then they do tend to get better at either infecting humans or replicating in cells, meaning making more baby virus when they infect you. And this particular mutation that's been identified does the latter. It will help the virus if it can infect humans. It will make a lot more baby viruses. And why do we care about that? Well, as a general rule, when a virus can replicate more and make higher levels of virus, it tends to cause worse disease in humans. So it's concerning. This isn't the end of the story. We've got to monitor this, but I think it is concerning that we still have not been able to stop the spread of this virus. And so we need to be doing more.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about that, Dr. Pate, because I believe you and I have been talking about bird flu for going on a year now. I think you and I had the first conversation in March or April of 24, if I'm remembering correctly. And,
right.
And you said, if we don't get a handle on this, this is what could happen. We could see it mutating. It could have the potential to spread more easily in humans. This is what we're starting to see. I don't want to alarm anyone, but what should we be doing right now as human beings as we're seeing these variants happening?
Well, at this point in time, the greatest precautions need to be for those that interact with cattle and those that interact with birds. So this can apply to farms. This could apply to, we know one man 2 years ago got infected working at a plant where they culled the infected birds. And so one thing is that if you're going to be around domesticated birds or backyard birds or chicken farms, those kind of things, or beef cattle farms, or dairy farms rather, those kind of things, you got to take some precautions. And so we've got that. The other thing is for those of us that don't work with these animals, our big concern is we just got to be careful with birds that we encounter. We should not interact directly with birds that appear to be acting sick. maybe they're off balance, maybe they're not flying like they should, or trying to get away from things, or that they're dead. And we certainly shouldn't just go and pick these up without taking precautions, those kind of things. But the major steps need to be on the part of our government. So we need to be checking these viruses for the current vaccines that we have for avian influenza. Our seasonal vaccines are not likely to convey much benefit, but we have some stored up avian influenza vaccines. We need to check and see, are they effective? And if they are not, we need to start working on new ones. We need to start doing a lot more research on antiviral treatments for influenza virus. And I'm afraid that our government may be going in the opposite direction of decreasing our research into these infectious diseases. We need to be testing a lot more. And you and I talked about that the CDC just instructed hospitals, if you get someone admitted for influenza virus and it's testing positive, but it's not the common human strains, then it needs to go to specialized testing to see if we've got one of these avian influenza cases. But we've got to be controlling the spread of this among the animals. We've got to consider whether it's time to vaccinate the animals. We need to be doing more testing. There's just a lot that needs to be done, and I'm really surprised at our rather lackadaisical approach so far.
So with that said, I want to open up the mailbag because we have so many listener questions that have piled up. And I want to begin with one that has to do with the bird flu. This question comes from James, and he asks, with all the news about bird flu, is it safe to eat eggs right now? And how much should we cook them? And are raw eggs dangerous?
So we don't have complete answers to James' questions, but we do have some guidance. So the first thing is, I think until we do get more information, we should probably treat raw eggs as a potential hazard. First of all, they were a hazard before bird flu because of the risk of salmonella. So we don't really recommend that people ingest raw eggs anyway. And the same goes for raw milk and dairy products. Pasteurization is the best process to deal with these things. Now, most of the shell eggs, the whole shell eggs that you would buy in the store, they're probably not pasteurized. So those would be more concerning to eat raw. If you could find pasteurized shell eggs, then yeah, but there's really no health benefits to a raw egg compared to just going ahead and cooking it. Eggs have a lot of nutritional value, but they have the same value if they're cooked. As far as cooking them, what we believe is that if you can get them to 160 degrees, which means that the yolk would not be runny, you would cook the yolk through, then we believe they're safe. Now, talking about research, we're not really even sure if humans can get infected by ingesting the virus. We have reason to believe they might be able to, and certainly we've demonstrated that in a whole host of animals. But I think for right now, until we can get this research done, it would be best for people to avoid raw dairy products of any kind and avoid raw eggs, and make sure that the dairy products are pasteurized or the eggs are pasteurized, or at least if you're getting the common eggs that aren't pasteurized, just cook them.
Okay. And as you said, though, too, because I know a lot of folks love those runny yolks, but maybe to be on the safe side, don't do that right now.
Yeah, until we have a little bit more information. If we didn't have any reason to be concerned, I would say don't worry about it. But there is reason to be concerned, but we don't know. We don't have proof of that yet. It's just too early.
So Peggy wants to know, she says, I'm having difficulty finding a clinic or a pharmacy that has the Novavax vaccine. Do you know if it's still available? And I'll add on to this, Dr. Pate, because my oldest actually asked if there was a vaccine that he wouldn't have such a reaction to. He has a really big reaction every time to an mRNA vaccine. And I have to say, I couldn't find one. I couldn't find the Novavax.
Right. And that's the advantage of the Novavax. The studies have consistently shown, and certainly it's been the experience with people that I've been advising on the side, that the Novavax is dramatically fewer side effects than the mRNA vaccines. The Novavax vaccine is a little bit more challenging to find. One thing you can do is you can get your pens and pencils ready, or paper ready, and write this down. You can go to the website US, like the United States, .novavax.covid vaccine.com/vaccine -finder. And you can use that to try to locate pharmacies that have it. Even if it shows up that a pharmacy has it, you're still probably best to call. And the reason is the new 24-25 updated vaccine came out months ago. And so a lot of people are running out of it. Plus, right now, they're not manufacturing more of it because we're expecting the guidance to come out of the FDA as to what the makeup for the new fall vaccine should be probably this month. And so they're not making more of the previous. They're going to be focusing on making the new. Now, Costco has generally been a good chance of finding it, but everybody may be low right now. And if you can't find Novavax, unless you have some reason not to get the mRNA, then just go ahead and get the mRNA now, and then in this early fall, we should have the new version of the Novavax ready to go.
Dr. Pate, Jerry wants to know, do you think there will be an mRNA flu vaccine developed that I can take? I'm 79. I had severe Guillain-Barré syndrome when I was 13. Doctors have told me not to get the flu shot. I have faithfully gotten the COVID mRNA vaccine and thankfully never had COVID.
So, Jerry, you're in a tough spot. The answer is yes. I do think there's a fairly good chance we might get an mRNA vaccine for influenza. In fact, that research is going on right now internationally. So I do feel like there's a good possibility. On the other hand, our track record with flu vaccines has been very rocky. So one doesn't know. But one thought I have, and of course, it's probably going to be difficult to sort this out because it was so long ago, but if my math is correct, it means you would have had Guillain-Barré probably around 1959, plus or minus a year. Really, we didn't have a big problem with flu vaccines and Guillain-Barré until the 1976 vaccine, the swine flu vaccine. And then since we switched not using the swine flu preparations, we haven't had that much problem with Guillain-Barré and flu vaccines. So I guess one question I have is, was your Guillain-Barré really due to a flu vaccine? And is that necessarily that big of a concern? And why I say you're in a difficult spot is, first of all, that we know Guillain-Barré occurs more commonly with the actual infections, and many different kinds of infections can cause it, but you are more likely to get Guillain-Barré from actually getting influenza than from the current flu vaccines. So, this would be a good thing to talk. I would have to ask you about 20 different questions to try to get a good handle on this. You might talk with your doctor or an infectious disease specialist. But yes, I am optimistic that an mRNA vaccine has a chance of coming forward. We just learned so much.
So, Dr. Pate, this is an interesting question coming from Lisa. She says, Dr. Pate suggests that we should be able to research and find accurate information. So where would he suggest people with non-medical backgrounds look for accurate information?
Lisa, that's a great question. And my answer would depend a little bit on, what specific topic you were looking at, because some places are better for certain types of information. If you're interested in what Jim and I most often talk about, and infectious diseases, emerging diseases, you can still go to the World Health Organization site. They have a lot of good information. One place that I have used a lot is, and you've heard me talk throughout the years about one way that I look to see what do I expect is heading the United States way, is to look at what's going on in other countries. And I will tell you, the United Kingdom, their Health Security Administration, so the UK HSA, they put out better technical briefs than our CDC does. Now, that might be a little bit much for you. You can kind of see what you think, but they do really, they're one of the best, I think. The other thing is, even though there's a lot of uncertainty about whether we're going to be getting as much and as good information out of the CDC, a lot of the state public health departments have great information, and Idaho included. Now, I do fear that there's going to be pressure that it comes down on the states to do this. And so it may be you need to pick and choose which states' websites you look, but that's a good resource. There's another one, CIDRAP, which is the Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy out of the University of Minnesota. They put out really high quality information that I think would be very understandable to someone without a medical or science background. And then finally, I guess a person I'd recommend if you want to look on social media, Helen Bramswell has been a reporter on this subject for decades. She knows the ins and outs and is often getting scoops on stuff before I see it anywhere else. So she could be someone you might want to follow. And then we just have to look at specific diseases or things of interest after that.
So Shelley wrote in and she said, I'm 50 years old. I recently got my first shingles vaccine. Now online, it says to get the second dose 2 to 6 months from the first vaccine. Is it better to get the second dose at 2 months, or should I wait closer to 6 months?
That is a really insightful question, Shelley. First of all, for people that don't understand about shingles, shingles is a very painful complication that people can get that have previously been infected with chickenpox, which is most people are, Shelley's in my age. And in fact, there's a pretty high chance as you get older that it's going to come out. And so we do routinely recommend this vaccination, and it's very effective. You get 2 doses, and as Shelley said, it's recommended 2 to 6 months apart. We don't frankly know the answer to your question. However, there is some emerging research that I don't know for sure will apply to the shingles vaccine, but as we looked at COVID vaccines, it looked like 2 months was a little bit on the short side, and that you didn't get as vigorous an immune response. You still will, but not as vigorous if you waited till 3 or 4. So again, I don't know that that's going to apply to the shingles vaccine, but the immunology of it would still apply. And I am guessing that maybe the best time might be to do it at kind of in the middle, 3 to 4 months. And but I think you're going to have a great response whether you go 2 or 6 months. But if you just want to try to take an educated guess at optimally timing it, I'd shoot for 3 or 4.
And Dr. Pate, how important is it for folks over the age of 50 to get the shingles vaccine? Because I definitely, every time I'm at the pharmacy, there's always big signs for it. And I don't really remember that, maybe 10 years ago with there being such a push to get this vaccine.
Yeah, and it's because this latest vaccine is relatively new, and it is much more effective. It's very highly effective and protective, and it's even protective of having the shingles outbreak itself. Now, for most people, shingles will be a terrible, painful nuisance for a good while until it resolves, but they'll get over it. But there are life-threatening forms of shingles, and when it occurs around the eyes, and even there's other special, like if it's distribution around your ear, that can result in some serious problems. So it is something that anybody who's had shingles would tell me they would be happy to have avoided going through that, and very willing to have a vaccine. And it's very effective, and we have a new one that works so much better, and that's why it's kind of getting pushed. But if you as you get older, your chances of having a shingles outbreak increase. I'd have to look up the stats, but it's over 50%. If you, depending as you get further along in age. So it's well worth getting the vaccine.
Mm-hmm. We have about 2 minutes left, Dr. Pate, and I want to get to this question from Beth because I think it impacts a lot of folks. And she says, can you please ask Dr. Pate about the new executive order from the new administration taking away Medicare's ability to lower drug prices?
Yes. So it has long been a problem that the United States doesn't negotiate prices like almost every other country does. So we pay much, much, much higher prices for drugs. Fortunately, Congress and the administration have recently put into law that we are going to negotiate for a certain number of drugs. And there was an expansion of that in the investment. I can't remember the name of the bill, but the investment bill that was passed during the Biden administration. Now, the executive order that President Trump has ordered wouldn't completely undo that, and probably legally couldn't. But they can certainly muck with it and slow down the process and decrease the effectiveness of it. But I think I just have to rely that, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you're paying too much for drugs. And many of the drugs are outrageous. And I hope that there will be people of both parties making their voices heard to Congress that we don't want this to slow down and we want this to continue. It's also facing some legal challenges. I think at the end of the day, it won't be a huge deal, but I pray it won't.
Well, with that said, as always, Dr. Pate, we sure appreciate you. And we will get to more listener questions next week as well. Remember, if you do have a public health question, send us an email, idahomatters@boisestate.edu. And that'll do it for this episode of Idaho Matters. Thanks so much for listening. And just a reminder, you can find all of our episodes wherever you get your podcasts.
Each morning, it's a new opportunity, a chance to start fresh. Up First from NPR makes each morning an opportunity to learn and to understand. Choose to join the world every morning with Up First, a podcast that hands you everything going on across the globe and down the street, all in 15 minutes or less. Start your day informed and anew with Up First by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts.